Welcome back, everyone. Today we are pulling the rug out from under centuries of apologetics. Islamic scholars have a golden rule they always repeat to you. Quote, the Quran is perfect. It is eternal. It has absolutely zero contradictions. Unquote. They will read you Surah 4, verse 82, which boldly challenges the world. Quote, if this book were from anyone other than God, you would find within it much contradiction. Unquote. But tonight we are going to look at the massive elephant in the room. The moment you find an undeniable contradiction in the text, the scholars pull out a theological escape hatch. They call it naskh, meaning abrogation in English. They tell you, quote, oh, God didn't contradict himself. He just deleted that old verse and replaced it with a better one. Think about that. You cannot claim a book has zero edits while simultaneously bragging that the author edits the book whenever he wants. Tonight, we are mapping out the exact stages of how the Quran actively edits its own laws on stream. Specifically, the shocking four-stage transformation of alcohol. We are going to dismantle the standard defenses, crush the excuses, and deliver the ultimate logical checkmate. Smash that like button, share the stream, and strap in. Let's get into it. Okay, so this is what I have from AI. Thank you, AI, so much. Really appreciate it. And I'm going to the screenshots I've taken. I'm going to start from the very beginning, how AI and I came to this. So AI gave me for this live stream in a structural way, but before that, I start here. This is AI and to argue against the theological defense of abrogation, naskh. So remember, I did abrogation in my previous live stream today. And so again on this, and I think I have to, no. So, and the contradictions. So now it's on how abrogation exposes the Quran's contradictions. Right? So to argue against the theological defense of abrogation, naskh, you must show that using it to explain away contradictions logically destroys the claim of the Quran's divine immutability and perfection. Let me just check the sound also. Sorry about this. Sound coming? Yeah. When the religious scholars cite verses like Surah Al-Baqarah, Ayah 106, we do not abrogate a verse or cause it to be forgotten, except that we bring forth one better than it. To justify changes in text or rulings, they are inadvertently admitting to a changing chronological text rather than an eternal perfect one. Here is a step-by-step logical framework you can use to counter this defense when debating or explaining your position to religious scholars. The dilemma of eternal knowledge. The scholars claim Allah changes a ruling, ayat, over time because a new situation arose or Muslims needed a gentler transition. The counter-argument. This implies a reactionary deity. If the Quran is a copy of Law al-Mahfuz, the preserved tablet, co-eternal with God, every change was already known. The logic, if God replaces an old verse with a better one, it means the first verse was temporary, imperfect for the long term, or contextual. A truly unchanging divine entity would not need to issue a temporary command, only to overwrite it later to correct the course, right? So to correct the course, sorry, excuse me, correct the course. The scholars claim Nusk is not a contradiction, the universal versus contextual contradiction, dilemma of eternal knowledge, universal. The universal versus contextual contradiction, number two. The scholars claim Nusk is not a contradiction, right? So that's why I had to ask AI about this. It is a progressive revelation, what the scholars claim. The counter argument, this reduces the Quran from a universal book for all times to a historical notebook tied to the seventh century Arabia. The logic, if a verse says, be patient with disbelievers, and later verse says, fight them, claiming the second canceled the first proves that both statements cannot be universally true at the same time. If they cannot both be true universally, the text contains situational contradictions that have been managed by human classification, right? Scholars deciding which verse killed which. So it's the scholars to decide which verse abrogates which verse. So this is what the scholars have to do. The Quran doesn't do this for us. The test of Surah An-Nisa, Ayah 4, Ayat 82, the verse, then do they not reflect upon the Quran? If it had been from any other than Allah, they would have found within it much contradiction. The counter argument, Nas, is an external mechanism invented by scholars to force harmony onto textual differences that fail the Surah 4 Ayat 82 test. You see, it is an external mechanism. Now, this AI will explain later. Although the Quran is there that about Allah abrogating and bringing a better verse. The logic, if an author writes a book, changes their mind halfway through, deletes a rule, inserts a new one, a reader would naturally call those conflicting statements by labeling contradictions as abrogation. Theological scholarship created a semantic escape, right? Textual counter-argument. Fail. So where was that? The labeling contradictions as abrogation. Theological scholarship created a semantic escape hatch. You are essentially telling the scholar you are changing the definition of contradiction to protect the text from its own criteria in Surah 4, Ayat 82 of the Quran. Textual versus ruling absurdities. Number 4, textual versus ruling absurdity. The scholars claim sometimes the verse is erased from the text entirely, but the law remains, or vice versa. The counter argument. This directly violates the promise of divine preservation. The logic. If verses were revealed, memorized, and later completely removed from the physical Quran, such as the famous alleged verse of stoning or breastfeeding mentioned in hadiths, then the earthly Quran is not identical to the eternal version. If bits were dropped or replaced along the way, the claim of perfect textual preservation collapses. That's a hadith from the Sunni side, right? The Sunni side, not the Shias. Summary checklist for your debate. When speaking to a scholar, structure your checkmate like this. Thank you, AI. Google AI. The establish the standard. Number one, establish the standard. Agree that Surah 4 at 82 states a divine book must have no discrepancies or inconsistencies. Define the mechanism. Point out that Nusk abrogation literally means to cancel, replace, or alter. Deliver the pivot. Ask them, If a human author changes his laws mid book, you call it an edit or a correction. When the Quran does it, why do you call it a divine miracle instead of an inconsistency? Close the trap. If the verses are eternal, they cannot change. If they change, they are bound to time and human history. Bound to time and human history. Bound to time and human history, making them undivine. If if you want to prepare for specific rebuttals, you have hit precisely on the core of circular logic. This is the exact pivot point where the theological defense traps itself. To counter argue effectively, you must point out that the scholars are using a logical fallacy, begging the question. They are using a claim inside the book to justify a flaw that violates the book's own ultimate test of divinity. Since Allah has put in the Quran ayat, here's how you break down that we abrogate and bring a better verse. So AI helped me. Here is how you break down that argument and explain it logically to a scholar. The core paradox, self exception, the scholar's defense. The Quran says Allah abrogates. So abrogation is divine, not a contradiction, right? Yes. And how the scholars. Okay. The counter argument, an author cannot write a rule saying my book has 0 edits, then write a second rule saying I'm allowed to edit whenever I want and claim the book remains unedited. The logic, Surah 4, Ayat 82, sets an absolute objective standard for humanity to judge the book. If it has discrepancies slash contradictions, it is not from God. If you find 2 verses that command opposite things, they are by definition, right? They are by definition a contradiction. Sorry. So, author cannot write. Allowed, yes. My book cannot write a rule. My book, where was I now? Discrepancy, if it is not from God, command to judge. Okay, 2 verses that command opposite things, they are by definition a discrepancy, right? Or a contradiction. Telling a reader, ignore that discrepancy because Surah 2, Ayat 106 gives God permission to change his mind, directly invalidates the objective test of Surah 4, Ayat 82 of the Quran. You are asking the listener to abandon logic to save the theology. This is how AI tells me to explain to you and the religious scholars. The trap of bringing something better. Surah 2, Ayat 106. We do not abrogate a verse, except that we bring forth one better than it or similar to it. The counter argument. If verse B is better than verse A, then verse A was by definition inferior, incomplete, or less perfect. The logic, if the Quran is the eternal, unchanging word of an all knowing God, co eternal with Him on the law al Mahfuz, how can one part of God's eternal speech be better than another? An all knowing being does not reveal an inferior or temporary rule to a human population, only to realize later that it is time to upgrade it to a better one. That is how human legislators write laws. Dash. Through trial, error, and progression. Number 3, the scholar's weapon is a double-edged sword. The reality of Nas. Scholars did not just accept Surah 2 Ayat 106 of the Quran, they vastly expanded it because they had to. The counter argument. The Quran itself never explicitly lists which verses are abrogated. Scholars invented the science of Nas. Right? You get it? Scholars invented the science of Nusk because they found massive contradictions they could not resolve. So, which ayats were to be abrogated and which ayats are to remain? Scholars invented that, right? Created that, invented that, the science of Nusk. The logic, for example, the verse of peace and tolerance, there is no compulsion in religion, Surah 2, ayat 256 of the Quran, deeply contradicts the later verses of warfare. Kill the polytheists wherever you find them, Surah 9, ayat 5. Quran does not say Surah 9, ayat 5 cancelled, Surah 2, ayat 256. Human scholars decided that by using Surah 2, Ayat 106 as a blanket excuse. Scholars are using a vague divine statement to justify their own justify where were we? Yes, here. To justify their own human guesswork in deciding which verses are dead and which are alive. Number 4, the ultimate checkmate, the chronological argument. The setup, a divine eternal book should be independent of time. The counter argument, abrogation forces the Quran to be entirely dependent on human chronology. Right? The logic, excuse me, the logic. If verse A applies in year 2 of the Hijrah and verse B cancels it in year 9, then the validity of God's word depends on a calendar. If a person reads the Quran today as a universal guide for the year 2026, both verses sit on the same page without a historical biography, seerah, written by humans years later. A reader has no way of knowing which verse is cancelled. Therefore, the Quran ceases to be a self contained, clear, divine book as it claims to be. Adi, right? For the Quran, where was I now? Sorry about this. The screenshots are words depends on calendar. And what's the word? Therefore, the Quran ceases to be a self contained, clear, divine book. It becomes a historical text, and it claims to be a self contained, clear, divine book, right? It becomes a historical text that requires human gatekeepers, scholars, to tell you which words of God are actually allowed to follow. How to how to say this directly to a scholar script. You are using Surah 2, Ayat 106 of the Quran to excuse a violation of Surah 4, Ayat 82. Surah 4, Ayat 82 says, if a book is from God, you will find no discrepancies in it. It does not say you will find no discrepancies except the ones God decided to abrogate, right? By claiming that God replaces an inferior verse with a better one, you are describing a deity that reacts to human time and human history, making edits along the way. If a book requires a specialized human science, NUS, to tell you to decided to abrogate, yeah. If if a book requires a specialized human science, NUS, abrogation, choosing which verses to be abrogated from the Quran and which verses are not abrogated from the Quran, to tell the reader which verses have been cancelled by other verses, then the book contains internal conflicts. Calling those conflicts abrogation, right? Quotation, I forgot. Quotation, closed. Quotation open, quotation closed. Abrogation, on abrogation. Doesn't make them disappear. It just gives a contradiction a religious name, right? It just gives a contradiction, a religious name. To help refine this further, let me know. Do you want to break down a specific example, like the shifting rules on drinking alcohol or the direction of prayer, Qibla? Are you anticipating they will argue that abrogation was just a merciful step by step transition for the early Muslims? Yes, your anticipation is 100% correct and highly accurate. This is the standard textbook defense that every trained Islamic scholar will use. They will call this concept taj, tadrij, gradualism, and frame it as a beautiful, merciful act of divine pedagogy. Pedagogy, teaching, meaning a divine teaching. They will argue God didn't change his mind, he changed the rules to match the growing capacity of the people out of mercy. While this sounds emotionally appealing, it completely fails under logical scrutiny. By using this defense, the scholar actually surrenders the claim that the Quran is an eternal, perfect, universal book and reduces it to a local historical document. Here is exactly how you dismantle this merciful quote merciful transition unquote defense by the scholars and Muslims. While this sounds emotional, yeah. So how you here's how you how here is exactly how you dismantle this merciful transition quote unquote defense. Number one, the local versus universal trap, the 2026 checkmate. The scholars claim God erased the 7th century Arabs from their old habits like drinking alcohol or marrying polytheists, step by step, because sudden change would be too harsh. The counter argument: if the transition was specifically tailored for the psychology of 7th century Arabs, then those verses are historical artifacts, not universal guidance for humanity. The logic: if a person converts to Islam today, they are expected to stop drinking alcohol instantly. They do not get a merciful, quote, merciful step by step transition, unquote, over 20 years. Therefore, the transitional verse in the Quran serves zero practical purpose for the modern human. Modern human. Human. Or logic. For the modern human. By arguing that arguing logic. What have I done? By arguing that God wrote edits into his eternal book for the psychological comfort of one specific generation of Arabs, the scholar admits the Quran is a highly localized, time bound diary of the Prophet's mission rather than a timeless manual for all mankind. The omniscience versus pedagogy dilemma. The scholars claim an all knowing God chose to reveal laws gradually as a mercy, right? As a teaching tool also. The counter argument: a perfect teacher does not write contradictions into a textbook and then erase them. A perfect teacher writes a complete curriculum from day one. The logic: in human law, when a government passes a temporary law and replaces it later, it is called an amendment. Amendments happen because humans cannot predict the future or because society changes. If God is truly all knowing, he already knew the final law from the very beginning of time. Revealing an inferior or temporary law, verse A,
and verse A, and later wiping it out to bring a better one, verse B, means the book itself contains obsolete data. The textual absurdity why okay, textual absurdity, why keep the cancelled verses? The setup asks the scholar a practical question about the preservation of the text. The counter argument: if the transition is over and the final law has been established, why are the cancelled, obsolete verses still inside the Quran? The logic: if a medical textbook has an old dangerous treatment method on page 10 and a new corrected cure on page 50, a student would call that a student a student would call that a poorly edited textbook. If the step-by-step transition for, was purely for the companions of the prophet, keeping those cancelled verses in a book meant for billions of future humans, right, causes mass confusion. It forces humans to rely on human scholars to tell them, oh, don't follow that verse on page 200. It was cancelled by a verse on page 400. This shatters the Quranic claim of being a mubin, clear, manifest book. Number 4, turning Surah 2, Ayat 106 against them. The setup: look closely at the wording of the very verse they used to defend: abrogation. The counter argument: Surah 2, Ayah 106 of the Quran does not say we change a verse to match your gradual transition. It says we bring forth one better than it. So it's not very specific. It's just very open to, open, not specific about the transition, not clear. It's unclear. The logic better, khairan, is a qualitative statement about the verse itself, not about human capacity. If verse B is inherently better than verse A, it means verse A was objectively inferior. You cannot have an inferior word of God coexisting eternally with the superior word of God on the preserved tablet, Law al Mahfuz. Law al Mahfuz, right? Please hold on. Do you think TikTok? No, it's not on the topic. So I'm going to ignore you. Sorry about that, what you've written here. I understand how to counter this in debate. Understand that you view gradualism as a form of divine mercy for the early Muslims. But by saying that you are admitting those verses were situational, temporary, and bound to the 7th century history, if the Quran is a universal book for all eras, why does a modern reader have to read through temporary cancelled rules meant for people 1,400 years ago? Furthermore, Surah 2 Ayat 106 doesn't say God changes verses because humans are unready. It says He replaces them with something better. If God's speech can be upgraded from good to better over a span of 23 years, then the book was undergoing active edits. You can call those edits, you can saying replace. Okay, where am I? So, furthermore, God changes verses because humans are unready. It says he replaces them with something better. If God's speech can be upgraded from good to better over the span of 23 years, no. You can call those edits a merciful, sorry, I was here. You can call those edits a quote, merciful transition, unquote, to make it sound theological, but textually and logically, an edit is an edit. And according to Surah 4 at 82, a divine book should not require edits, overrides, or corrections. Overrides or corrections. A divine book. Here is a complete breakdown of alcohol. Okay, now here is a complete breakdown of alcohol. I didn't show a scholar. Tuesday, what have I done? Okay, here is the complete breakdown of the alcohol transition mapped out chronologically. Wait, did I? Oh, sorry. Replace them with something better for God's speech. Edits a merciful transition, make it. Book should not require edits, overrides, or corrections. That's it. So this would be the answer. Logic. This would be an answer to the religious scholar. Now, here is the complete breakdown of alcohol transition mapped out chronologically, followed by a punchy high utility script summary designed specifically for your YouTube stream. Thank you, AI. The four-stage chronological shift of alcohol in the Quran. To show a scholar how the text actively edits itself, you can lay out the progression of alcohol, while mainstream scholars claim this is a merciful, again, quote, merciful three-stage transition, unquote. It textually moves from praising the substance to banning it. Note, there are actually four stages textually. Stage 1, positive blessing. Stage 1, positive blessing, Surah An-Nahl, 16th chapter of the Quran, ayat 67, the text. And from the fruits of the palm trees and grapevines, you take intoxicant, alcohol, and good provision. The same word in Arabic. The, the context revealed in Makkah. The logic fault. Here, intoxicants, succor, are listed directly alongside good, right? Good provisions, alongside good provisions, sorry, as a sign, good provision, as a sign of God's benevolence and blessing to mankind. There is no hint of sin or harm. Stage 2, the mixed bag. Surah Al-Baqarah 219. The text, they ask you about wine and gambling. Say, in them is great sin and yet some benefit for people. But their sin is greater than the benefit. The context. Early Medina period. The logic fault. The text shifts from calling it a positive blessing to a mixed bag. Crucially, it is still not prohibited. People are legally and religiously allowed to drink, despite the text stating it contains great sin. This creates a logical paradox. God allows people to consume something. God allows people to consume something He actively defines as a great sin in the Quran ayat. Stage 3, the time-bound restriction. Surah An-Nisa ayat 4, Surah 4, fourth chapter of the Quran, ayah 43, the text. Text properly here. O you who have believed, do not approach prayer while you are intoxicated until you know what you are saying. Dot, 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 right? So this is important. The context, Medina, the logic fault. Drinking is now banned only during specific times of the day, prayer times. If a Muslim drank heavily right after the night prayer, Isha, they were completely without the law. They were completely within the law, sorry. Right? So if a Muslim drank heavily right after the night prayer, Isha, they were completely within the law. The text actively tolerates intoxication for the majority of the day as long as it does not overlap with ritual worship. The logic fault. The total ban abrogation. Okay, AI gives Surah Maida ayat 9. Oh, sorry, Surah Maida ayat 90. So, Surah 9 of the Quran, right? The total ban, the abrogation. The text, O you who, Surah Maida ayat 90, O you have believed, indeed, intoxicants, gambling, are but defilement from the work of Satan, so avoid it that you may be successful. The context, late Medina, one of the very last major surahs revealed. Context. The logic fault. The logic fault. Alcohol is now a defilement from Satan and completely banned. Checkmate. Conclusion on alcohol. Ask the scholar, ask the scholar if a modern convert drinks alcohol today, are they allowed to use stage 1, 2, or 3? So AI says they would say no. They are sent to hell or punished under Sharia law. Therefore, stages 1, 2, and 3 are dead text. They are obsolete edits. An eternal perfect book does not keep 15 years, right? In years, right? Eternal logic of alcohol is not defilements complete ban. So now they're allowed to use. Ask the scholar, yeah, so 15. Oh, they are obsolete edits, right? An eternal perfect book does not keep 15 years of outdated, hazardous legal loopholes inside its pages just to show a historical progression for a single generation of 7th century Arabs. YouTube stream summary and talking points. Use this clean, punchy outline for your stream, notes, slides, or verbal delivery. For your stream, notes, slides. Okay. Stream title ideas, ultimate checkpoint. How abrogation exposes the Quran's contradictions. Side 1, the core paradox. Surah 4, ayat 82 says, if this book were from anyone other than God, you would find much contradiction. Surah 4, ayat 82. Right? You would find much contradiction, discrepancy. This contradiction means discrepancy slash inconsistency in it, right? Meaning, Surah 2 ayat 106 says, God abrogates, deletes, cancels verses and brings better ones. Deletes slash cancels, right? And brings better ones. The stream argument. You cannot claim a book has zero edits, Surah 4 ayat 82, while simultaneously bragging that God, this is what how AI has written it, right? While simultaneously bragging that God edits the book whenever he wants, Surah 2 ayat 106 of the Quran. Calling an edit abrogation is just a theological don't know how to pronounce this, sorry, euphemism or euphemism for a contradiction, right? Euphemism. Much contradiction, euphemism, where is it? For a contradiction. Side 2, the alcohol case study, 4 stages of edits. Stage 1, Surah 16, ayat 67. Alcohol is called a blessing and good provision from God. Stage 2, Surah 2, ayat 219. Alcohol has benefits, but it also has great sin, still legal to drink. Stage 3, Surah 4, ayat 43 of the Quran. Alcohol is banned only Alcohol is banned only during prayer times, legal to drink the rest of the day. Stage 4, Surah 5, ayat 90. Alcohol is completely banned and called the work of Satan. Wait a minute. Some Muslims say no, it's not completely banned because the word haram is not put next to alcohol, like my uh, ex friend told me, right? A Muslim friend told me. Side 3, dismantling the merciful transition defense. When scholars say this was just gradualism to ease the Arabs of alcohol out of mercy, hit them with these three counter punches, right? But the time bound trap, if those verses were only for psychology of 7th century Arabs, however, some scholars, Muslim scholars, uh, try to fix this by saying that alcohol is not haram. It's not banned completely, right? So, not a universal. Okay, but let's look at what AI says on this. Has been, given me on this. The Quran is a local. If those verses were only for the psychology of 7th century Arabs, and then the alcohol was banned, meaning, but some religious scholars say it wasn't banned. The Quran is a local historical diary, not a universal book for all of humanity. The modern flaw. A person converting to Islam today in 2026 does not get a 20-year merciful transition. The old verses are completely useless to modern humans. Number three, the imperfection admission. Surah 2, ayat 106 says the new verse is better than the old one. If God's later words are better, it means his earlier words were. God's later words were better, it means his earlier words were inferior. An all knowing eternal God does not speak in inferior or temporary versions that need upgrading. Slide 4, the final checkmate script. If a human author changes his laws mid book, we call it an edit or an inconsistency. Or edit is same as when you change it, it's the same as inconsistency in for this argument, right? Logical. Oh, I got it, AI now. So when the Quran does it, scholars call it. So when the Quran does it, when the Quran does it, scholars call it a divine transition. Quote, divine transition, unquote. By inventing the science of naskh, abrogation, scholars are forcing harmony onto textual differences that fail in Surah 4 at 82 test. They are changing the definition of contradiction, which also means editing, bringing additions, to protect. They're changing definition of contradiction to protect the text from its own criteria. Thank you, AI. I really appreciate this. If you want to prep for your stream further, let me know. You want help? To help you deliver a flawless, high energy stream, here is your dramatic intro script. Okay, I said that the perfect strategy to crush the Hadith defense and the exact textual trap using Surah 7, Ayah 33 that I had to give to AI from the Quran to prove alcohol is unquestionably defined as haram in the Quran, forbidden, right? Part 1. Okay, I said my dramatic speech earlier here. Surah 2. Oh, sorry, part 2. The Surah 7, Ayah 33, alcohol trap, proving it is haram. You have found a brilliant airtight textual link here. Some modern apologists try to play word games, claiming alcohol was never strictly made haram. Yes, because Surah 5, Ayat 90 just says avoid it. Fajtane buhu. Sorry if I mispronounced this, right? Just a minute, right? Fajtane. Yes, avoid it. You can use Surah 7, Ayah 33, to mathematically trap them using the Quran's own vocabulary. Step A, establish what is haram using Surah 7, Ayah 33. The text, say, my Lord has only forbidden haram, forbidden immoralities, and sin, al-itham. The logic, this verse explicitly states that all sin, itham, is strictly haram, forbidden by God. Step B, connected to the alcohol verse, Surah 2, ayat 219, right? The text, they ask you about wine and gambling, say, in them is great sin, ithmun kabir, great sin, ithmun, great, a sin, great, right? The logic, Surah 7, ayat 33 says, all itham, sin, is haram. Surah 2, ayat 219 says, alcohol contains ithmun kabir, great sin. Therefore, by the Quran's own explicit definitions, alcohol is haram. The logic. Okay. How to use this on stream to expose a massive contradiction. If alcohol contains great sin, Surah 2, ayat 219 of the Quran, and all sin is strictly forbidden in Surah 7, ayat 33 of the Quran, then alcohol was already textually haram in Surah 2, ayat 219. Yet, during stage 3, Surah 4, ayat 43, God tells them, do not pray while drunk. This means God was actively giving Muslims permission to consume something that his own vocabulary defined as a great haram sin. Gunai kabi ithmun kabira. As long as they sobered up by prayer time, right? This completely destroys the argument that God's laws are perfectly consistent and harmonious. How to defeat the hadith defense in live chat. When your chatters realize they are losing the Quranic argument, they will immediately jump into your live chat throwing hadiths. Sahih Bukhari Muslim, the ones that Sunnis, it's Sahih Sitta for the Sunnis, right? But not for the Shias. At you. They will say the hadith explains the context. The Prophet explained that the verses were gradual because the companions were addicted to alcohol. Here are the three lethal counter punches to shut down the hadith defense instantly. The subordination. Counter punch one. The subordination argument. What to say? Are you telling me that a human book of history, hadith, written 200 years after the prophet, is required to fix a logical flaw in the eternal word? In the eternal word, where am I? Eternal word of God? Again, are you telling me that a human book of history, hadith, written 200 years after the prophet, is required to fix a logical flaw in the eternal word of God? If the Quran is mubin, clear and manifest, it means, mubin means clear and manifest. And Allah says this in the Quran. There's an ayat. And complete, right? If the Quran is mubin, clear and manifest and complete, it should stand on its own logic. If you need a hadith to explain away a contradiction, you are admitting the Quran failed its own test in Surah 4, ayat 82, without human assistance. Written without human assistance. Counter punch 2. Reservation trap. What to say? If you bring up hadiths, you make the problem worse. Sahih hadiths explicitly state there were verses about stoning and adult breastfeeding that were written down, but then a sheep ate the paper, or sheep ate the paper, or they were forgotten. Nasq al-tilawah, right? Nasq al-tilawah. If you trust those hadiths, You are admitting the physical Quran we have today is missing verses that God supposedly revealed. You are destroying the claim of perfect textual preservation just to save the text from a contradiction. Counterpunch 3, the chronological nightmare. What to say? The Hadith tells us the historical timeline. Oh, I didn't know that. So the Hadith tells us the historical timeline of when these verses dropped. By doing that, you prove my point. The Quran is a time-bound situational diary of 7th century Arabia. If a verse is only valid because of a specific historical event recorded in a hadith, then the Quran is not a timeless universal book for a guy sitting in London or New York in 2026. It is a historical artifact. Quick stream checklist for you. Okay. To help you polish your presentation, let me know if you would like me to format a clean Q&A cheat sheet listing the exact scholar objections and your quick answers, or if you need any other Quran verses citations checked. Here is your polished high utility Q&A cheat sheet, tailored for your live stream presentation. Thank you, AI. Each slide section contains direct citations and the scholar objections are paired with punchy, irrefutable counters. Stream presentation cheat sheet. Verified Quran citation. Key for reference. The ultimate test, Surah An-Nisa, Ayah 82, the no contradiction standard. The escape hatch, Surah Al-Baqarah, Ayah 106, the abrogation mechanism. Alcohol stage 1, Surah An-Nahl, Ayah 67, alcohol called a good blessing. Alcohol stage 2, Surah Al-Baqarah, Ayah 219, alcohol called a great sin, Itham. Alcohol stage 3, Surah Nisa, Ayah 43, alcohol banned only before prayer. The haram definition. Yeah, sorry. Alcohol banned only during stage 3, sorry. Alcohol banned only before prayer, right? That was stage 3. Oh, alcohol stage 4, I should miss. Surah Al-Maida, Ayat 90. Alcohol completely banned as satanic. The haram definition. Surah Araf, Ayah 33, explicitly states all sin, itham, is haram, forbidden. Section 1, the logical trap, Surah 48, Surah 4, Ayat 82, verses Surah 2, Ayat 106. Scholar objection number 1. Abrogation is not a contradiction. Allah explicitly says in Surah 2, Ayat 106, that He replaces verses with better ones. It is a divine right, not a mistake. Your on stream counter, the core fallacy. You cannot claim a book has 0 edits from Surah 4, Ayat 82, while meaning in Surah 4, Ayat 82, while simultaneously bragging that the author re-edits the book when he wants. Surah 2, Ayat 106. Let me say this properly again. Sorry. You cannot claim a book has 0 edits, meaning it doesn't have contradictions, inconsistencies, discrepancies, meaning what Allah has put in for contradiction in Surah 4, Ayat 82. So this means that it shouldn't even have edits. 0 edits. 0 changes. While simultaneously bragging that the author re-edits the book wherever, sorry, this is a word written by AI, and given to me. Re-edits the book whenever he wants in Surah 2, Ayat 106 of the Quran. The faulty test. Surah 4, Ayat 82 tells the reader to look for discrepancies to judge if the book is from God. If an author writes opposite laws on the same page, that is a discrepancy. The takeaway: calling an edit abrogation doesn't make it disappear. It just gives a textual contradiction a religious name. Scholar objection 2. This is the objection from the scholar. When Allah brings a better verse, it just means it is better suited for the people at that specific time, not that the old verse was bad. Your own stream counter, the vocabulary trap. The Arabic word used in Surah 2, Ayat 106 is khayran, better. This is a qualitative statement above the verse itself, right? The perfection dilemma. If the Quran is co eternal with God on the preserved tablet, Law al Mahfuz, how can one part how can one part of God's eternal speech be inherently better or upgraded over another? The takeaway: an all knowing being does not speak in inferior, quote unquote, temporary drafts that need upgrading later. Section 2. The alcohol case study and the Surah 7, God, I'm sorry, tongue tied, and the Surah 7, Ayah 33, haram trap. Scholar objection 3 to this. The shifting verses on alcohol were a merciful step by step transition, the Darij, for the pagan Arabs who were severely addicted. God erased them into the law. God, not erased, eased. God made it easy for them. God eased them into the law. On your stream counter, your on stream counter. Sorry, I make mistakes. I apologize for all this. The 2026 reality check. If a person converts to Islam today, they do not get a 20-year gradual transition. They must stop instantly. The obsolete text, if the transition is over, keeping 15 years of outdated legal loopholes inside a universal book makes no sense. It forces future humans to rely on human gatekeepers, scholars, to tell them which verses are dead, abrogated, cancelled. The takeaway: this defense reduces the Quran from an eternal guide to a localized historical diary of 7th century Arabia. Scholar objection 4. Alcohol wasn't actually haram in the early stages because the Quran didn't use the specific word haram until the very end. You're on stream counter. The mathematical trap. Let's look at the Quran's own internal dictionary. Surah 7 ayat 33 explicitly declares all sin is strictly haram. Surah 2 ayat 219 of the Quran explicitly declares alcohol contains ithmun kabir, great sin, the unavoidable conclusion. Therefore, by the Quran's own math, alcohol was textually haram during stage 2. The checkmate. If alcohol was already a great haram sin in stage 2, why did God give them a loophole in stage 3? Surah 4, ayat 43. To keep drinking it outside of prayer times. God was actively permitting a great sin, right? God was actively permitting a great sin. I double, sorry. Section 3, crushing live chat hadith spammers. Chatter, objection 5. You are taking verses out of context. The Sahih hadiths perfectly explain the timeline and why the Prophet changed these rules. You're on stream counter. The self-sufficiency flaw. The Quran claims to be mubin, perfectly clear and complete. If you need human history, books written, it said this, and I think logical flaw, you are admitting the Quran fails its own Surah 4 ayat 82 test by itself. Okay. Your on-screen counter, the self-sufficiency flaw. The Quran claims to be mubin, perfectly clear. Yeah, the preservation nightmare. If you want to use hadiths, let's talk about them. Sahih hadiths state that verses about stoning and adult breastfeeding. This is again a repetition, right? But got lost in sheep. Got lost or eaten by sheep, naskal tilawa. If you trust those hadiths, you just destroyed the claim that the Quran is perfectly preserved. Quick stream day pro tips. Visual aid. When doing the alcohol section, display Surah 7 I 33 and Surah 2 I 219 side by side on your screen. I don't have to do this now. Pacing when scholars pacing. When scholars throw long Arabic terms at you like nask or tadrij, translate them instantly for your audience to keep the power in your hands. They call it tadrij, but in plain English, that just means editing a book over time. Good luck with your YouTube stream. If you want to refine how to handle live call ins and all, thank you, Acing. Number one, um, to clarify this mathematical trap and the resulting legal loophole, we must look at how the Quran establishes a definition in one place, violates it in another, and how Islamic history verifies the order in which these verses appear. Part 1. I had to ask AI more questions on this. Clarifying the mathematical trap. Yeah, please clarify this. To explain this to your audience, clearly present it as a simple algebra puzzle or a syllogism, I don't know, okay, where A plus B equals an impossible contradiction. Premise A, the rule. In Surah Al-Araf, Surah 7, I 33, Allah gives a blanket definition of what is forbidden. Say, my Lord has only forbidden harama, immoralities, and sin, al-itham. Therefore, everything that is defined as an itham, sin, is textually haram. Premise B, the classification. In Surah Al-Baqarah, ayat 219, Muslims ask about alcohol. Allah states, say, in them is great sin, ithmun kabir, right? Therefore, alcohol is textually classified as an itham, sin, right? Let's break down exactly how stage here. So, refute the absolute rule. Oh, where are we? How stage 3 violates the logic of stage 2. Here's how you explain the conflict to your audience. The math proves that stage 3 creates an active loophole for Muslims to engage in a great haram sin. Wait a minute. let's break down exactly how stage 3 contradicts and violates the absolute rules established in stage 2 and the Makkan verses, and how we know with 100% historical and text based certainty the exact order of these verses. I didn't know that. Anyways, again, part 1, how stage 3 violates the logic of stage 2. Here is how you explain the conflict to your audience. The math proves that stage 3 creates an active loophole for Muslims to engage in a great haram sin outside of prayer hours. Number 1, the absolute rule in Surah 7, Ayat 33, Allah states that all sin, itham, is strictly haram. Haram, there are no exceptions. No exceptions, right? Number 2, the absolute category, Surah 2, Ayat 219, Allah In that, Allah officially labels alcohol as a great sin in that ayat, Ithman Kabir. Therefore, by the Quran's own internal vocabulary, alcohol became completely haram at this exact point. The stage 3 contradiction, Surah 4 ayat 43, Allah later states, do not approach prayer, right? Do not approach prayer while you are intoxicated, right? Why this destroys the claim of consistent divine law. If an action is already categorized as a great haram sin, a perfect all-knowing lawgiver cannot tell his followers, just don't do this haram sin right before you pray, but feel free to do it during your off hours. By creating a rule that only bans intoxication at specific times, stage 3 actively tolerates and allows Muslims to consume a great sin for the rest of the day. In another legal system, if a lawmaker passes a law that restricts a dangerous activity to a specific, right? Where is it? Dangerous, great sin, lawmaker passes a law that restricts a dangerous activity to specific hours, they are legalizing it for the remaining hours, right? They are legalizing it for the remaining hours. Part 2. How do we know these verses came before stage 3? A scholar will try to escape this trap by claiming maybe the verses didn't come down in that exact order. You can completely crush this escape hatch using established Islamic history, Asbab al-Nuzul, the scholars who use Asbab al-Nuzul, and scholarly consensus. Here is how we know the chronological order. AI knows this. Proof 1. Surah 7 ayat 33 was revealed first, Makkah. The history. Islamic scholars universally agree that Surah Al-Araf is a Makkan surah. It was revealed years before the Prophet and his companions migrated to Medina. Right? The fact, the baseline definition that all sin is haram, was set in stone at the very beginning of the Islamic movement then. Because the Makki ayat, Surah Araf ayat 33, and the surah was revealed in Makkah, so sin is haram. Proof 2, Surah 2 ayat 219 was revealed second, early Medina, right? The history, Surah Al-Baqarah, was the first surah revealed after the Muslims arrived in Medina. The fact, this is when the question of alcohol was first raised in the new Muslim community. God officially categorized it under the word ithm, sin, because the Makkan rule, Surah 7, Ayah 33, already banned all itham, sin, the trap slammed shut here. Right? Proof 3, Surah 4, Ayah 43 was revealed. Third, late Medina, the history, Surah An-Nisa, was revealed much later, specifically around the fourth year after the migration. Right? 4AH. The fact, classical commentaries like Tafsir ibn Kathir and books on the context of revelation Asbab al-Nuzul state that Surah 4 ayat 43 of the Quran was revealed because a companion named Abdurrahman bin Auf hosted a dinner party. The companions drank alcohol, got heavily intoxicated, stood up to pray the evening prayer, and completely mangled the words of the Quran because they were drunk, right? The result, because of that specific historical blunder by human beings, Surah 4 ayat 43 was revealed to tell them to stop praying while drunk. The ultimate on-screen summary. When you present this on YouTube, stream map the contradiction out like a timeline for your viewers. Your ex Makkah, God sets the definition. I think this is enough what the AI has given me and how AI has presented it, right? Your ex Makkah, God sets the definition. All sin is haram. Surah 7, ayah 33 of the Quran. Year 1, Medina, God fits alcohol into that definition. Alcohol is a great sin. Sin. Surah 2, ayah 219 of the Quran. Alcohol is now haram, right? Alcohol is a great sin, which was revealed about alcohol in year 1 of Medina. Migration. Yeah, entering, coming to Medina. Year 4 of Medina. Companions got drunk at a party and messed up their prayers. God reacts to human history by issuing a new command: don't pray while drunk. Surah 4 ayat 43. Right? Ask your chat. If alcohol was already a great sin in year 1, why is God issuing a partial time limit? Why is God issuing a partial time limit on it in year 4? Ask yourselves this, Muslims. Year 4, Medina, companions got drunk. Yeah, I wrote this. Sorry about the screenshots and all that. It takes year 4. Yeah. An all knowing deity does not react, right, to a dinner party by loosening a moral law he already declared a great sin. This timeline proves the text was shifting, reacting, and editing itself based on human events, completely failing the perfect contradiction free standard of Surah 4, Ayat 82 of the Quran. Uh, go, go get some rest after this. You have worked hard to map out this logic. And you, to help the Shia community, it helps to understand that Shia religious scholars are caught in the exact same logical trap as Sunni scholars, but they try to escape it using a different theological spin. When Shia scholars look at the chronological timeline of alcohol and the mathematical trap of Surah 7 ayah 33 and Surah 2 ayah 219 of the Quran, here is exactly what they will argue and how you can counter it on your stream. The Shia defense, the infallible never drink. The Shia defense, the infallibles never drink. Shia argument. Shia scholars like those in Tafsir al-Mizan, Allama Tabatabai, argue that alcohol was always fundamentally haram from day one. They emphasize that the Prophet Imam Ali and the Ahl Bayt, the Prophet's family, never drank a single drop of alcohol in their lives because they were divinely immaculate, ma'asum, infallible, ma'asum, or divinely immaculate. The problem, by admitting that alcohol was always haram, they walk right into your trap, right? If alcohol was always a sin, it means God knowingly allowed ordinary Muslims to commit a great haram sin for over 15 years, actively giving them a time bound loophole in stage 3, Surah 4, ayat 43. The Shia gradual clarification theory. The Shia argument, Shia scholars argue that naskh, abrogation, meaning in English, here was not a change of mind by God. Instead, they call it bayan, clarification. They argue that God banned all sin in Makkah, Surah 7, ayah 33. But because the Arabs were weak and addicted, God didn't explicitly name alcohol as that sin until later. Excuse me. He brought the laws gradually to systematically wean society of it. Of it. Now, your own stream counter. This defense completely collapses under the Surah 4 Ayah 82 standard. If a human doctor knows a chemical is a deadly poison, but tells their patient, you can drink it after 8 p.m., just don't drink it before your morning meetings, that doctor is legally and morally complicit in poisoning the patient. If God knew alcohol was a great sin, haram, issuing a verse, Surah 4, ayat 43, that officially permits intoxication as long as you aren't praying, means the divine law was compromised to accommodate human addiction. Number 3, crushing the Shia versus Sunni abrogation debate. On your stream, you can expose a massive internal fight between Shias and Sunnis that makes both sides look logically inconsistent. The Sunni position, Sunnis accept all forms of abrogation, including naskh, al-tilawa, where verses were entirely deleted from the physical Quran text. The Shia position, Shia scholars fiercely reject this. Excuse me, sorry. They point at Sunnis and say, if you believe verses were deleted or eaten by sheep, you are admitting the Quran is not perfectly preserved, right? The checkmate for both. You can tell your viewers the Shias are right to mock the Sunnis. I mean, this is what AI has written, right? The Shias are right to mock the Sunnis for believing verses were lost. I mean, it's well put, right? But the Shias are stuck with the same problem. They still have to explain why contradictory laws like the alcohol progression sit side by side inside the modern text. Whether you call it gradual weaning or abrogation, you are both admitting the text contains temporary, conflicting edits that fail the timeless standard of Surah 4, Ayat 82 of not, if it was from God, then it is. But if it would not have any contradictions. Contradictions can be defined as edits also, not only and discrepancies. The checkmate vote. Okay, where am I? We're lost, but the Shias are stuck with the same problem. They still have to explain my contradictory laws. Abrogation, you're both admitting. Yeah, I think it's abrogation. Whether you call it gradual weaning or abrogation, you are both admitting the text contains, yeah, Surah 4, Ayat 82. Conflicting edits, sorry, you're both admitting the text contains temporary, conflicting edits that fail the timeless standard of Surah 4, Ayat 82. Of having contradictions would mean having no edits. Also. Stream prep done, go to sleep. Thank you very much, AI. Really appreciate this, right? So, it's finished. Thank you for your time and attention. Really appreciate it. Remember to be on the topic, please. Stick to the topic. No, I do not go on TikTok. I'll answer you now. Only on YouTube. I'm only hello, hello, hello. Thank you. So this for the highs. Please stick to the topic. Yeah. Hope you come again and watch this. My live streams. Hope you join me, subscribe to me. I forgot to put it on subscribe only because the maybe I thought the religious scholars would want, but it shouldn't be like this. It should be a video actually. I could have put the live chat off, you know, put it as a video, but I can't because of my condition in case. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Any questions or anything? Let me see. Do I have to any position? Any questions? So in my previous live stream, I didn't start from the very beginning where, we go back and forth, AI and I, Google AI strengthening your argument. Okay, this is going to be too much for now. So I'll just end the stream. Thank you for your time and attention. Thank you very much for the likes. Please share sparingly if you can. Keep the content the same. And I leave you now with the best. What I can't say right now because I may be so tired and trying to struggle for words, I leave you with my ending video, leaving you with the best.
We'll be back. Until then, thank you so much.